The fog does not roll into the valley with violence. It arrives with the silent, creeping certainty of an uninvited guest, folding itself over the cobblestones, wrapping around the iron lamps of the old city, and blurring the sharp edges of the world until reality feels like a rumor. In this twilight stillness, humanity moves with a collective, quiet resignation. Across millions of homes, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the pale glow of midnight screens, people sit in the quiet architecture of their own unlived lives. They nurse their longings like dying embers in a hearth, shielding them from the draft of practicality, whispering to themselves that desire is a dangerous luxury, a cruel illusion designed to mock the fragility of the human condition. Consider the paradox that defines modern existence. Never before has humanity been so acutely aware of its potential, yet never before has it felt so fundamentally disqualified from claiming it. Men and women walk through their days carrying silent blueprints in their minds, blueprints of healing that never arrives, of creative works left unwritten, of profound partnerships deferred, of financial liberation treated as a fairy tale for someone else's children. They look at these internal visions not as maps, but as mirages. They treat the deep, burning ache of ambition as a character flaw, an embarrassing itch of ego that must be scratched away with discipline, or a moral test imposed by a distant, stern cosmos that demands endless suffering before any semblance of grace is granted. Imagine standing at the threshold of a grand cathedral-like hall. The heavy oak doors are slightly ajar, and from within pours a light so golden, so incandescent, that it spills across the stone steps in long, inviting ribbons. Inside, a feast is laid out, prepared specifically for the traveler. Yet, instead of stepping across the threshold, the traveler drops to their knees in the mud outside. They begin to scour the dirt, searching for pebbles, polishing ordinary stones, convincing themselves that they must prove their worthiness to the master of the house by presenting a bucket of polished earth before they are permitted to touch the handle of the door. They plead for scraps, they bargain with the shadows, they negotiate with their own unworthiness, believing that to walk in uninvited, to claim the feast simply because they are hungry, would be an act of supreme arrogance. This is the great, tragic theater of human lack. It is a theater performed daily on the stage of the unconscious mind. But what if the premise of the entire performance is entirely false? What if the door was never locked from the inside? What if the desire burning in the quiet chambers of your heart is not a test of your endurance, not a punishment for your hubris, and certainly not a distant dream to be bargained for, but something altogether startling? What if the desire is a signal? What if the very presence of that holy hunger within you, that persistent, quiet, refusing to die whisper of a greater life, is the universe speaking in the clearest possible language? This is yours. Come and claim it. To dismantle the architecture of lack, one must first trace the genealogy of human guilt. Why is it that when a magnificent vision touches the human consciousness, the immediate physiological and psychological response is not ecstatic expansion, but contraction? Why does the heart tighten? Why does the mind instantly mobilize an internal tribunal, bringing forth an army of past failures, inherited shames, and cultural conditioning to cross-examine the validity of a dream? To answer this, we must employ the method of recursive thinking, stripping away the superficial layers of everyday anxiety until we reach the primary bedrock of human psychology. Why do we believe we must earn our good? Because civilization, from its earliest tribal iterations to its modern corporate manifestations, has operated on a transactional ledger. Survival was historically tethered to output. You hunted, you gathered, you bled, you complied, and in return the tribe allowed you to live. You satisfied the conditions of the external authority, and safety was granted as a wage. We transposed this transactional machinery onto the cosmos itself. We invented the cosmic boss, the celestial auditor, the divine bookkeeper who sits with a ledger, checking off our moral sacrifices, measuring our tears, and calculating whether our suffering has finally reached an acceptable numerical threshold to justify a blessing. How does this transactional illusion perpetuate itself across generations? It does so through the subtle poisoning of language and the weaponization of humility. True humility has been perverted into self-effacement. People are taught that to want greatly is to be greedy, that to expect ease is to be lazy, and that to possess an unshakable conviction of one's own fulfillment is a dangerous form of narcissism. Consequently, generations have been bound in a psychological straitjacket where they feel morally superior in their struggle. There is a perverse comfort in martyrdom. Suffering becomes an identity. To let go of the struggle is to lose the narrative structure of one's own life, because if you are not fighting for your good, who are you? If the battle is over, what defines your heroism? Let us push the inquiry deeper. Why does a desire arise in the human soul in the exact configuration that it does? Why does one person burn with the architectural vision of bridges, another with the healing frequencies of music, another with the quiet stability of a peaceful home, and another with the restructuring of financial systems? Are these impulses random atmospheric static in the theater of the brain? Modern philosophical idealism and advanced psychological frameworks suggest otherwise. A desire is not an external object chasing you down. It is an internal revelation of a reality already established in the multi-dimensional expanse of consciousness. Consider this mechanical principle. Creation is finished. Everything that can be conceived already exists in potential form within the infinite field of being. The human imagination is not a manufacturing plant that builds things out of nothing through sheer force of sweat and tears. It is a radio receiver tuned to specific frequencies of reality. When a desire is planted in your awareness, when a specific future grips your imagination and refuses to let go, it is because your consciousness has tuned into that specific frequency. The longing you feel is the resonance of your current self being drawn toward the actualized version of yourself that already exists in the unseen. The universe does not hand you a hunger it does not intend to feed. That would violate the fundamental law of balance that governs the stars, the tides, and the atomic structure of matter. Nature does not create an appetite without providing the nourishment. The stomach is born into a world of food. The lungs are born into an ocean of air. The eye is born into a spectrum of light. Therefore, by extension of this cosmic law, a spiritual hunger, a profound, persistent desire for expansion, love, mastery, or peace is absolute proof that the corresponding reality exists for you. To deny the validity of the desire, to label it as unrealistic or unearned is not wisdom, it is a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality operates. It is the eye closing itself and complaining that the sun does not exist because it refuses to look. In the late autumn of 1483, in a small stone workshop nestled in the rolling hills outside Florence, a young stonemason named Lorenzo stood before a colossal block of Carrara marble. The stone was famous throughout the region for its purity, but it had a troubled history. Decades earlier, another sculptor had misjudged the grain, struck a careless blow, and left a deep, jagged scar across the marble's face before abandoning it in despair. Since then, the great block had lain in the rain and dust, weathered, ignored, and written off by the guild masters as ruined. The master sculptors of Florence passed it by with expressions of pity or disdain. They looked at the scar, measured the ruined proportions, and declared with professional authority, the material is compromised, the potential is lost, it cannot be redeemed. Yet, Lorenzo could not walk away from it. Every time he passed the abandoned stone yard, his gaze was drawn to the scarred white mass. It was not a logical attraction. It defied economic sense. The marble was expensive to transport, difficult to carve around the fracture, and carried no guarantee of success. His peers laughed at him. Why waste your youth on a broken stone? There are fresh blocks in the quarries of Apuan. Take the easy path. Prove your worth on unblemished material. But Lorenzo felt a strange, quiet burning in his chest. It was an insistent internal voice that would not let him sleep. It whispered not of the stone's past injuries, but of an intrinsic form hiding beneath the surface. One morning, driven less by calculated ambition and more by an irresistible inner summons, Lorenzo rented an ox cart, hauled the scarred marble to his private shed, and locked the heavy wooden doors. For weeks he did not strike a chisel. He simply sat on a wooden stool in the dim light, studying the lines of the stone, running his calloused fingers over the fracture, and listening to the silent shape of what he knew was already there. He stopped asking himself whether he was skilled enough to fix Florence's greatest mistake. He stopped measuring his worth against the master sculptors in the city center. He shifted his posture entirely. Instead of viewing the marble as an obstacle to be conquered through exhausting, desperate labor, he began to view the stone as a willing partner waiting to reveal what had already been established in design. When he finally lifted his mallet, The blows were not frantic. They were precise, calm, and filled with the quiet certainty of a man uncovering something that was already finished. He did not fight the marble, he collaborated with its structure. He worked not from lack of recognition, but from the absolute conviction that the form of the triumphant youth he envisioned was already living inside the white dust. Months later, when the doors of the shed were thrown open, the townspeople gathered in stunned silence. From the very block that had been discarded as ruined, broken, and unredeemable, Lorenzo had liberated a masterpiece of breathtaking power, a figure of such poise and grace that it seemed to defy gravity itself. When the local magistrates asked him by what extraordinary technical genius he had managed to resurrect a dead stone, Lorenzo smiled and replied quietly, "I did not create anything new. I simply stopped arguing with the form that was already calling out to me. The stone knew what it was, I merely agreed with it." The story of Lorenzo and the scarred marble is not merely a historical anecdote from the Italian Renaissance. It is an exact blueprint for the architecture of your own consciousness. You are both the sculptor and the stone. For too long you have stood before the block of your own life, running your fingers over the scars of past failures, listening to the chorus of external voices telling you that you are compromised, unready, and unqualified. You have treated your deepest desires as impossible anomalies, waiting for some distant permission slip from a reluctant universe. It is time to drop the mallet of struggle. The integration of this truth requires a fundamental shift in your daily posture. You do not need to spend another year convincing life that you are worthy of your dreams. Worthiness was established the moment you drew your first breath and the universe endowed you with the capacity to dream in the first place. A desire that persists in your heart, one that follows you into the quiet hours of the night and greets you in the morning light, is not a teasing, cruel illusion. It is your commissioning. As you move through the remainder of this day, practice this single radical act of mental sovereignty. When your mind offers up the familiar objection, "Who are you to want this? How could you possibly achieve this? You haven't suffered enough, worked enough, or perfected yourself enough," catch yourself mid-sentence. Do not argue with the doubt, simply override it with the higher law. Say quietly to yourself, "The desire is the evidence. The longing is the proof. The universe wants me to have this, therefore it is already mine in consciousness." Feel the immediate physical release that accompanies this realization, the dropping of the shoulders, the slowing of the breath, the quiet settling of the soul into a state of profound, unshakable reception. As you step away from these words, carry this mystery with you into the hours ahead. If your greatest desire is not a test to be passed, but a gift already delivered to the doorstep of your soul, what happens to the way you walk through the world tomorrow? What fear loses its grip the moment you realize that the future you long for is already quietly waiting for you to agree with it? The answer to that question lies just beyond the threshold, waiting for us in Chapter 2. The night does not merely descend upon the high plateaus of human consciousness. It settles with a deliberate velvet gravity, bringing with it the unvarnished silence in which all deceptions temporarily lose their voice. In that deep, unsupervised quiet, stripped of the clamor of daily distractions, the superficial chatter of the ego falls away, leaving behind a stark, unmistakable pulse. It is the quiet burn of persistent longings, those quiet, stubborn echoes of desire that refuse to be extinguished by routine, age, or circumstance. Consider the paradox of human restlessness. A person may possess safety, comfort, and the predictable rhythms of a well-ordered life, yet experience a profound internal dislocation. They stand by an open window overlooking a sleeping city, watching the distant neon pulse against the dark sky, while a nameless specific ache swells within their chest. It is not a generalized anxiety, it is an acute, tailored hunger. It whispers of a life larger, truer, and more magnificent than the one currently occupied. Most people mistake this internal fire for a disturbance. They view it as a saying, an uninvited ghost rattling the chains of contentment, urging them to break what is stable or chase what is impossible. They try to drown the sound in work, in entertainment, in the numbing repetition of ordinary tasks. Yet, like a beacon cutting through a persistent coastal fog, the longing returns. It flickers back to life the moment the world goes still. Imagine a master clockmaker who creates a timepiece containing an intricate complication, a delicate indicator of celestial tides that the local villagers have never seen. Day after day, the clock ticks faithfully, yet a small, exquisite hand within the mechanism continually swings back and forth, pointing toward a blue dial that has no corresponding gear attached to it. The villagers look at the floating hand and declare it a defect. They say, "It is a broken mechanism. It is striving for a part that does not exist in this workshop." But the clockmaker smiles, knowing the truth. The floating hand is not a flaw, it is a preview. It was engineered precisely because a larger mechanism, fitted for celestial coordinates, is destined to be installed. So it is with the human heart. That persistent, refusing to die hunger is not a biological malfunction or a psychological error. It is the floating hand pointing toward a reality that has already been mapped in the unseen dimensions of your being. It is the anatomy of a holy hunger, specific, unmistakable, and profoundly personal. To truly understand why certain desires haunt our awareness with such relentless, specific precision, we must journey past the superficial layers of psychological craving and examine the mechanics of evolutionary consciousness. We must deploy the method of recursive thinking, interrogating the very nature of identity and asking the deeper questions that modern materialism refuses to touch. Why do desires carry such hyper-specific architectural blueprints? If human beings were merely survival-driven organisms shaped entirely by blind environmental adaptation, our desires would be uniform and purely utilitarian. We would long only for basic shelter, caloric security, and tribal safety. Yet, the human soul defies this reductionist model entirely. One person is gripped by the architectural passion to design regenerative cities. Another burns with the compulsion to heal genetic diseases through molecular chemistry. Another feels an unshakable inner demand to articulate philosophical truths through prose. How does this specificity manifest within the human vessel? It occurs because consciousness is not a homogeneous mist. It is an infinitely differentiated spectrum of divine expression. The universe is expanding through individual focal points of awareness. Every human life is a unique lens through which the cosmos experiences itself. Therefore, the specific desire that burns within you is not a random collision of cultural conditioning and accidental brain chemistry. It is the exact frequency required for your specific expansion. It is the divine intelligence using a particular human vessel to anchor a brand new iteration of reality into the physical plane. Let us push the recursive inquiry further. Why does this longing feel so intensely personal, often isolating the individual from the expectations of family, peers, and society? Because true vocation, derived from the Latin vocare, meaning to call, is never a collective committee decision. It is an individual summons. When the universe calls you toward a specific destiny, it deliberately detaches you from the consensus reality of the crowd. It creates a holy dissonance between who you currently are and who you are being summoned to become. This is why the presence of a persistent desire is often accompanied by an initial wave of terror. The mind recognizes that to fulfill the desire requires stepping outside the safe boundaries of the known tribe into the uncharted wilderness of individual actualization. The ego screams for safety, labeling the desire as unrealistic or selfish precisely because it threatens the comfortable mediocrity of the collective sleep. Yet, divine intelligence does not deal in generic blueprints. The cosmos does not say, "Let us create 1,000,000 identical units and give them interchangeable dreams." It crafts desires with breathtaking individuality, the artist's vision, the healer's intuition, the inventor's flash of insight. These are bespoke assignments. To reject your specific desire under the guise of humility or realism is not an act of nobility. It is a resignation of your cosmic post. It is the universe attempting to speak a unique word through your life, and your fears whispering back in static silence. In the winter of 1887, in a modest, drafty apartment in Paris, a young man named Jean sat bent over a wooden writing desk by the light of a single tallow candle. For 7 long years, Jean had carried an internal manuscript outline in his mind, a sprawling, intricate narrative exploring the redemption of human conscience through architecture and light. It was a story that did not fit the fashionable literary trends of 19th century France. It was too vast, too unconventional, and too deeply philosophical for the commercial publishers of the boulevards. Whenever Jean shared fragments of his vision with his literary acquaintances, they scoffed. "Who are you, Jean, to attempt such a monument? You are an unknown clerk from a provincial town. There are established novelists with academies behind them, men of letters whose pedigrees command the salons. Write a polite short romance for the journals. Leave the grand epics to those who have earned the crown." For months, Jean allowed these external opinions to form a heavy armor of doubt. He would stare at the blank sheets of paper on his desk, his heart burning with an agonizing fire, while his mind whispered, "They are right. I am unqualified. Why do I possess this impossible ambition? Why can I not be satisfied with a quiet, predictable life like other men?" The desire would not leave him. It haunted his waking hours. It woke him in the dead of night with vivid scenes playing behind his closed eyelids. It made ordinary conversation feel like hollow theater. The longing was not a gentle suggestion. It was an insistent, burning torment. One freezing night, driven to the edge of emotional exhaustion, Jean took his candle and walked through the silent streets of Paris until he reached the banks of the Seine. The dark water moved sluggishly beneath the stone bridges, reflecting the distant, indifferent lights of the city. He stood at the parapet, holding his leather notebook tightly against his chest, contemplating whether to throw the manuscript pages into the dark current and surrender his holy hunger once and for all. At that moment, an old street musician, a blind violinist wrapped in a frayed wool coat, sat beneath the shadow of a stone archway, playing a melancholy, soaring melody into the empty night. The music had no audience, no financial backing, and no institutional approval. Yet, the old man played with an absolute, majestic devotion, as if the notes were being pulled straight out of the starlight. Jean stopped. A sudden, profound realization pierced the fog of his despair. The old violinist was not playing for the approval of the Academy. He was playing because the music was alive inside him. The melody was not a burden imposed upon the musician. The musician was the instrument chosen by the melody. Jean looked down at his leather notebook. The story in his hands was not a vanity project or an unearned ambition. It was a living impulse that had chosen him because no other mind on earth possessed the exact configuration of memory, empathy, and vision required to give it birth. Jean turned away from the river. He did not walk back to his apartment as a beggar, seeking permission from the literary gatekeepers. He walked back as a man commissioned. He stopped asking whether he was worthy. He stopped measuring his pedigree against the establishment. He sat down at his desk and began to write, not from the desperate ambition to prove himself, but from the quiet, unyielding obedience to an internal summons. When The Covenant of Light was finally published 3 years later, it did not merely enter the literary world, it shook its foundations. It became a timeless classic read by millions across generations. Not because Jean had finally earned the right to write, but because he finally stopped arguing with the assignment that had been whispered into his soul. The transformation of Jean by the banks of the Seine illustrates the vital truth that every seeker must internalize. A persistent desire is never an accident, and it is never a random stroke of psychological static. It is a summons. It is the universe calling you forward into a higher octave of your own potential. As you navigate the hours following this chapter, take inventory of the longings you have dismissed, minimized, or hidden away in the dark corners of your mind. Examine the specific dreams that continue to return to your heart, no matter how many times you try to distract yourself with the mundane affairs of survival. That recurring thought is not your enemy, it is your direction. The practical integration of this principle requires an immediate shift in your linguistic and mental habits. Whenever the old internal dialogue begins, "Why do I want this? Am I not reaching too high? Who am I to expect such a life?" Replace those questions with the ultimate realization of your commissioning. Acknowledge that the specificity of your desire is the proof of its validity. You do not need to justify your longing to anyone, not even to yourself. You only need to accept that the universe does not plant a holy hunger in a human vessel without preparing the corresponding reality in the unseen. Close your eyes for a brief heartbeat. Let go of the need to explain your dreams to the world. Feel the quiet, undeniable burn of your own unique calling, and recognize that the universe trusts you with this vision. As you step forward from these pages, a profound mystery awaits your exploration. If your desires are custom-designed blueprints of your destiny, why do we continue to stand outside closed doors, assuming the universe is holding back what it has already prepared? The answer to that paradox lies just across the threshold, waiting for us in Chapter 3. The heavy wrought iron gates of an ancient walled courtyard stand half open under a vast indigo evening sky, yet generations of travelers are found huddled outside them in the dust. They sit with their backs pressed against the cold stone pillars, clutching empty wooden bowls, shivering in the draft of their own anticipation. When a cool breeze sweeps across the courtyard, carrying the faint, intoxicating aroma of roasted spices, vintage wine, and burning cedar from the banquet tables within, the travelers tighten their rags around their shoulders. They look up at the dark archway with an expression of profound, quiet resignation. Consider the enduring paradox of human spirituality. Humanity has lived for millennia under the spell of an invisible cosmic gatekeeper. People spend their entire lifetime standing before doors that are not actually locked, convinced that an austere, stern deity sits on a golden throne inside, keeping a meticulous ledger of human flaws. They believe that behind every closed door is a celestial bureaucrat who measures moral worth, weighs past transgressions, calculates emotional suffering, and decides arbitrarily whether a petitioner has finally earned the right to cross the threshold. They whisper to one another in the dark, exchanging tales of divine delays, of blessings withheld for reasons too complex for mortal minds to grasp, and of a universe that guards its treasures with jealous malice. Imagine watching a weary traveler approach one of these open gates. The traveler sees the feast spread out upon the marble tables just a few yards away. They take one tentative step forward, but suddenly freeze. An internal terror paralyzes their limbs. Am I clean enough? They whisper to the empty air. Have I suffered enough to sit at this table? Have I completed enough penance? Perhaps I must wait another 7 years, perform more sacrifices, and prove my spiritual stamina before I am deemed acceptable. With a sigh of heavy sorrow, the traveler steps backward, returns to the dirt, and sits down alongside the crowd. They accept delay as virtue. They embrace unworthiness as a badge of spiritual maturity. Yet, if that traveler had simply gathered the courage to walk past the pillars without asking permission, they would discover a startling, disorienting truth. There is no guard at the gate. There is no celestial accountant checking ledgers. There is no cosmic force withholding the feast. The door is open, the table is set, and the space has been waiting for an occupant since before the stars were flung into their orbits. The barrier has never been external. It has always been the phantom wall of human assumption, constructed from the myth of a withholding universe. To dissolve this pervasive myth, we must apply the rigors of recursive thinking to the architecture of divine law. Why has humanity spent centuries projecting its own tribal hierarchies of scarcity onto the infinite mechanics of creation? Why is the default posture of the human psyche one of supplication, begging, and fearful waiting? Let us peel back the layers through recursive inquiry. Why do we naturally assume that the universe operates through withholding? Because our entire terrestrial experience is rooted in finite resources. In the physical world of matter, food is limited, territory is bounded, currency is scarce, and human affection can be fickle or withdrawn. If one person takes a loaf of bread, another goes without. We projected this zero-sum game of material survival onto the infinite field of consciousness. We imagined a creator who runs out of supply, who must ration grace, and who tests the moral endurance of petitioners before releasing a fraction of divine favor. How does this projection manifest as the illusion of divine delay? It manifests through the psychological state of waiting. People say, "I am not ready yet. I need more time, more healing, more lessons, more perfection before I can receive." But let us push deeper with the recursive question. Does the universe possess any concept of not ready in the human sense of the term? Advanced metaphysical philosophy and the deeper laws of consciousness reveal an absolute negative. The infinite intelligence of the cosmos does not look upon a human being and say, "No, not yet." They must wait another 3 years, endure another heartbreak, and cry a few more tears before they meet the moral requirement for joy. The universe does not judge, it does not punish, and it does not delay for delay's sake. Instead, the universe acts as a flawless, indifferent mirror. It mirrors precisely the state of consciousness occupied by the observer. If you assume you are separated from your good by a wall of unworthiness, the mirror reflects a wall. If you assume you must wait for an arbitrary season of readiness, the mirror reflects an endless holding pattern. If you assume you are broken, the mirror obligingly presents circumstances that confirm your brokenness. The delay you experience is not the universe withholding your blessing. It is your own consciousness maintaining the state of lack. Let us press the inquiry to its absolute root. How does the universe actually respond to human desire? It responds exclusively to state. It does not respond to your desperate pleas, your tearful bargains, or your righteous justifications. It responds to what you assume to be true in the quiet chambers of your identity. When a child learns to walk, does the infant sit on the nursery floor and hold a philosophical debate on whether it has earned the right to stand? Does it consult an elder to verify if its spiritual vibrations are pure enough to take a step? Of course not. The child desires movement, and because movement is a natural law of its physical form, it attempts to walk, it falls, it rises, it tries again. It does not blame gravity or accuse the floor of withholding support. It simply assumes that walking is its birthright, and through that unshakable assumption, coordination follows. Why should the unfoldment of your life be any different? You do not need to earn the right to experience your own expansion. You do not need to justify your longing to the stars. The very presence of the desire within your consciousness is proof that the state required to house it is already available to you. The universe is not keeping score of your flaws. It is simply waiting for you to stop standing outside the gate and step into the reality that has already been prepared. In the northern reaches of 17th century Europe, during the bitter grip of the Little Ice Age, a remote monastery, nestled in a deep mountain pass, held custody of a legendary relic known as the Scroll of Provision. According to centuries of monastic lore, the scroll contained the master secret of limitless abundance, a formula inscribed by ancient sages that could instantly dissolve poverty, famine, and scarcity from any community that possessed it. Generations of monks had lived in that high-altitude fortress. They were pious, humble, and fiercely devoted, yet they lived lives of grinding austerity. They rationed their meager grain supplies down to the final kernel. They patched their threadbare robes with coarse wool, shivered through freezing winters without fires, and spent hours every night on their knees on cold stone floors, chanting tearful prayers of petition. They pleaded with the heavens to send them relief, to soften the heart of the austere mountain climate, and to finally grant them the blessings promised by the sacred scroll. The abbot of the monastery, an old man named Brother Ignatius, had spent 40 years of his life kneeling before the iron-bound chest that held the scroll. His knees were calloused, his body was broken by fasting, and his eyes were hollowed out by decades of desperate waiting. Every year, he told his younger brothers, "We are not yet holy enough. Our prayers lack the necessary fervor. Our sacrifices are too small. We must suffer more, deny ourselves more completely, and prove our absolute devotion before the scroll will unlock its power for us." One autumn, a young novice named Julian arrived at the monastery. Julian had not been raised in the strict ascetic traditions of the mountains. He had come from the bustling trade cities of the lowlands. When Julian saw the monks shivering in the dark, eating watery broth, and weeping over their empty storage bins, a profound sense of confusion stirred within him. That night, unable to sleep because of the biting cold, Julian walked quietly into the candlelit chapel where Brother Ignatius was keeping his nocturnal vigil before the iron chest. The old abbot was weeping, whispering broken prayers into the silence. "O Lord, look upon our suffering. See our penance. When will you deem us worthy of your abundance?" Julian stepped forward from the shadows. With a gentle, respectful hand, he placed his palm over the old abbot's shoulder. "Father," Julian whispered softly, "why do you beg for bread when the bakery is already warm?" Ignatius looked up, his eyes flashing with righteous indignation. "Boy, you do not understand the sacred mysteries. This chest holds the secret of provision, but it remains locked because we are unworthy. We have not suffered enough to command its power." Julian looked past the old abbot, stared directly at the heavy iron chest, and then looked around the freezing chapel. With a calm, deliberate movement, Julian walked past the kneeling monks, stepped up to the altar, and reached out. To the absolute horror of Ignatius and the gathered brothers, Julian did not offer a prayer of petition. He did not recite a litany of his sins. He simply turned the heavy iron latch of the chest. The latch clicked open with a soft, effortless sound. There was no divine thunderclap, no punishing lightning bolt, no celestial guardian striking the novice down. Inside the chest lay no complex magical formula, no secret code of penance, and no moral ledger. There was only a single, heavy parchment scroll. Julian unrolled it in the candlelight. Across the aged vellum, written in bold, elegant ink, were only a few simple words. The storehouses are already full. The table is already set. You are not waiting for God to be ready. God is waiting for you to stop withholding yourself from your good. Brother Ignatius stared at the words in stunned silence. The truth washed over him like a warm wave breaking across frozen ground. He realized that for 40 years he had been standing outside an open door, punishing himself in the snow, believing that his suffering was a currency that could purchase what had already been given as a gift. The monastery did not remain poor after that night. The monks stopped begging and started distributing seed. They stopped fasting out of lack and began working from abundance. The illusion of the withholding universe dissolved, replaced by the radical, liberating realization that grace requires no sacrifice, only acceptance. The story of the mountain monastery exposes the profound self-deception that keeps so many human beings trapped in cycles of waiting and strain. You have looked at the closed doors of your own life, the delayed promotions, the unmaterialized partnerships, the healing that seems perpetually out of reach, and you have blamed the timing of the cosmos. You have whispered, "I must not be ready yet. I need more lessons. I need more time." It is time to shatter that illusion completely. The universe is not withholding your good. The universe has no storage room where it hoards your blessings until you have satisfied some hidden moral requirement. The delay is entirely the product of your own mental posture, the persistent assumption that you are separate from what you desire, that you must suffer to earn it, and that reality is a harsh taskmaster rather than an infinite mirror. As you step into the remainder of your day, perform this immediate internal audit. Whenever you find yourself delaying your happiness, holding back your joy, or postponing your peace under the guise of not being ready, stop yourself instantly. Recognize that you are standing outside an open gate in the snow. Replace the thought of lack with the sovereign claim of acceptance. Say to yourself, the universe is not withholding. I am ready now because the desire is here now. I drop the armor of struggle. I step across the threshold. Feel the psychological weight lift from your shoulders as you realize that you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. The table is set. The door is off its hinges. As you carry this liberating truth forward, a deeper mystery beckons from the shadows of our journey. If the universe is an open house of endless supply, why do so many souls remain locked in the defensive solitude of loneliness, convinced that love has permanently passed them by? The answer to that poignant paradox awaits us on the other side of the threshold, in Chapter 4. The winter wind howls down the deserted avenues of a coastal city, driving sheets of cold rain against the tall, dark-paned windows of a high-floor apartment. Inside, the room is bathed in the amber glow of a single brass desk lamp, casting long, melancholic shadows across an immaculate, silent interior. A woman sits by the glass, her hands folded over a cooling cup of tea, staring out into the misty expanse where the ocean meets the heavy, bruised sky. Every surface in the room speaks of immaculate order, yet it is an order born of emptiness. It is a sanctuary constructed with the precision of a tomb, safe, sterile, and profoundly untouched by the warm, unpredictable chaos of shared human love. Consider the quiet tragedy of the guarded heart. Millions of people live in the midst of physical abundance while experiencing a bone-deep, chronic isolation. They have convinced themselves through years of accumulated disappointments that love, companionship, and deep belonging are commodities meant for others, for the fortunate, the naturally charismatic, or those whose youth has not yet been weathered by time. They look at their past relationships as a ledger of debts, a graveyard of failed attempts, where every broken promise carved a deeper trench of cynicism into their soul. Imagine an isolated island fortress surrounded by calm turquoise waters. For generations, the inhabitants of this fortress have watched ships pass on the horizon, laden with exotic spices, rich fabrics, and joyful voyages. Yet, the islanders never lower their drawbridge. They have bolted the heavy iron chains, reinforced the wooden beams, and posted lookouts on the highest towers to scan the horizon not for incoming cargo, but for invading threats. When a friendly vessel approaches the shore and drops anchor, signaling an invitation to trade and communion, the islanders retreat deeper into their stone keeps. They fire warning arrows into the sea, shouting down from the ramparts that they are too old, too scarred, too battle-worn, and too fundamentally unworthy of welcoming a foreign guest. They choose the cold, predictable safety of total solitude over the terrifying vulnerability of opening their gates. This is the great paradox of human loneliness. It is rarely inflicted by an indifferent world. It is self-enforced exile. People measure their lives by what has not happened. They tally the years spent alone, the anniversaries passed in silence, the quiet weekends stretching out like endless deserts, and they use this historical evidence to forge an invisible wall around their hearts. They whisper to themselves, "I am too late, the door has closed, love has passed me by." They treat their longing for partnership not as an invitation, but as an indictment, a cruel reminder of a deficit they believe can never be balanced. Yet beneath that defensive armor, the heart continues to burn. The desire for intimacy refuses to die. Even in the dead of winter, behind bolted doors and defensive walls, the human spirit aches for the touch of another consciousness. And herein lies the profound, disorienting truth. The very loneliness they endure is not proof that love is absent from the universe. It is the friction of a heart refusing to claim what has already been prepared for it in the unseen. To dismantle the fortress of chronic isolation, we must apply the rigors of recursive thinking to the psychology of emotional defense. Why does the human mind weaponize its own past against its future? Why do we instinctively retreat into solitude when we desire connection the most? Let us trace the architecture of emotional self-sabotage through recursive inquiry. Why does the ego build walls in response to heartbreak? Because the ego's primary biological and psychological directive is survival, not expansion. When a heart is broken, when a profound romantic bond shatters, or an anticipated partnership fails to materialize, the ego registers the event not merely as a disappointment, but as an existential threat to its integrity. It draws a primitive absolute conclusion. Vulnerability equals destruction. Connection equals pain. Therefore, to remain safe, we must barricade the gates against all future possibilities. How does this defensive posture manifest in day-to-day reality? It manifests through desperation masked as independence. People claim they no longer need anyone, that they are self-sufficient, that they have outgrown the need for romantic love. But let us push the inquiry deeper. Does the desperate claim of independence match the silent, burning longing of the soul? Advanced metaphysical philosophy and deep psychological deconstruction reveal that the universe does not respond to what you say with your lips. It mirrors what you occupy in your state of consciousness. When you walk through the world draped in the heavy cloak of past rejections, when you measure your worth by the empty spaces in your calendar, you are broadcasting a vibrational frequency of lack. The universal mirror, entirely neutral and infinitely responsive, looks at your assumption of unworthiness and obligingly reflects back more isolation, more distance, and more missed connections. Let us press the inquiry to its bedrock. Why do people believe that love has an expiration date? Who established the myth that after a certain number of years or after a specific accumulation of heartbreaks, a human soul becomes too old or too late for romance? This is a cultural illusion rooted in biological reductionism. The soul has no age. Consciousness does not decay. The capacity for profound, transformative love is infinite because it originates from the infinite source of all being. When a person says, "I am in my 40s, my 50s, my 60s, and love has passed me by," they are committing a fundamental category error. They are treating love as a finite commodity distributed by a capricious lottery rather than an inner state of being that must first be occupied before it can be experienced in physical form. Think of a radio receiver sitting in an abandoned room. Does the radio care how long the room has been empty? Does the receiver need to earn the right to capture the symphony playing in the invisible electromagnetic waves around it? No. The moment the dial is tuned to the correct frequency, the music pours through the speaker instantly, filling the silent room with vibrant life, regardless of how many years the room sat in dust. So it is with the human heart. You do not need to rewrite your history, erase your scars, or wait for an external seal of approval to be ready for love. You simply need to stop praying from the posture of absence and begin occupying the state of being cherished. The moment you drop the weapon of self-rejection, the mirror of life must shift its reflection. In the heart of the provincial French countryside, during the early decades of the 20th century, lived a woman named Claire. At 42 years of age, Claire inhabited a world of muted tones and heavy silences. She lived alone in a stone cottage at the edge of a quiet village, tending a modest garden and working as a seamstress for the local families. Claire's life had been defined by a singular, persistent narrative. Late. Years earlier, a deep romance had ended in sudden, tragic separation, leaving her standing at a railway station with a ticket for a journey that never departed. From that day forward, Claire had closed the doors of her heart. She dressed in somber grays and blacks, avoided village celebrations, and convinced herself with ironclad certainty that the chapter of love was permanently finished for her. Whenever well-meaning neighbors hinted at new beginnings, she would smile bitterly and say, "Some fields are meant to lie fallow. My season for warmth has come and gone. The good men are all taken, and I am simply too old, too set in my ways, and too deeply scarred to begin again." Yet, despite her rigid intellectual defenses, a strange thing happened in the quiet hours of twilight. As she sat by her hearth stitching fabrics by firelight, a profound, aching wave of loneliness would wash over her. It was not a casual wish. It was a deep, burning hunger for companionship, a desire to share her thoughts, to laugh across a dinner table, to walk hand in hand through the autumn woods. But immediately upon feeling that longing, her mind would rush in with its heavy patrol of doubt. Who could ever love a woman with such a history? You are too late. You are invisible. One spring afternoon, a traveling clockmaker named Henri arrived in the village. Henry was a man in his late 40s whose life had also been marked by profound loss, yet his eyes carried an unmistakable light of quiet serenity. He set up a temporary workbench in the village square, repairing antique timepieces for the townspeople. When Claire brought her grandfather's broken pocket watch to his stall, she expected a cold, transactional exchange. Instead, Henry looked up from his magnifying eyepiece, smiled warmly, and invited her to sit on the wooden bench beside him. They began to talk not about the weather or local gossip, but about books, music, the passage of time, and the strange, beautiful persistence of human hope. That evening, unable to sleep, Claire walked down to the riverbank outside the village. The water reflected the pale silver of the rising moon. For the first time in 20 years, she confronted the ghost of her own self-imposed exile. She asked herself aloud into the night wind, "Why do I punish myself for what did not happen? Why do I treat my desire for love as a forbidden crime?" At that moment, a profound realization broke through her defenses. She understood that her loneliness was not a life sentence imposed by the universe. It was a prison cell she had constructed with her own assumptions of unworthiness. The universe was not withholding love from her. She was withholding herself from love. Claire stopped debating whether she deserved happiness. She stopped measuring her worth against her age or her past heartbreaks. She dropped the heavy armor of protection and made a quiet, sovereign choice. If I desire love, then love desires expression through me. The longing is not my punishment, it is my path. Beginning that very night, Claire changed her inner posture. She stopped praying from the cold desperation of lack. In the quiet sanctuary of her cottage, she practiced the feeling of being cherished, not as a distant fantasy for someday, but as an immediate reality in consciousness. She occupied the state of one who is deeply loved, valued, and accompanied. She walked through her village the next day with her head held high, not with the frantic desperation of a hunter, but with the calm, radiant dignity of one who already possessed what she sought. Within 3 months, through a series of quiet, unforced synchronicities that she could never have orchestrated by sheer willpower, her friendship with Henry deepened into a profound, enduring partnership. When they finally married in a quiet ceremony by the river, Claire shared a simple truth with him. "I spent 20 years standing outside a closed door, weeping because I believed I was too late. The moment I stopped asking permission to be happy and simply accepted that love was mine, the door swung open of its own accord." The transformation of Claire illustrates the ultimate psychological breakthrough required to transcend the loneliness of the unclaimed gift. You may have spent years, perhaps decades, standing outside the locked doors of partnership, career fulfillment, or emotional healing, whispering to yourself that time has run out, that you are too broken, or that life has passed you by. It is time to drop the keys of exile. The universe does not measure your readiness by the calendar on your wall or the volume of your past heartbreaks. It responds exclusively to the state you occupy right now. If you continue to walk through life wrapped in the shroud of unworthiness, the mirror of reality will faithfully return your isolation. But the moment you drop the armor, the moment you recognize that your persistent longing for love and belonging is the universe's quiet assurance that the reality already exists, everything shifts. As you move through the hours following this chapter, execute this immediate mental realignment. Whenever the familiar ache of loneliness arises, do not shrink from it and do not feed it with self-pity. Recognize it for what it truly is, a divine summons. Replace the whisper of, "I am too late," with the unshakable declaration of acceptance. The universe has placed this desire for love in my heart, therefore love is already mine in consciousness. I drop my defenses. I step into the state of being cherished. Feel the immediate emotional softening that follows the sudden warmth in the chest, the releasing of tension in the jaw, and the quiet, radiant certainty that you are never truly separate from what your soul is designed to experience. Take a slow, deep breath. Release the cold armor of self-protection you have worn for so long. Feel the quiet space within your heart expand, welcoming the profound truth that you are worthy of every magnificent desire that has ever touched your soul. As you carry this liberating frequency forward into the remainder of your day, a final, towering mystery stands before us on the horizon of our journey. How do we take these transcendent metaphysical principles and anchor them into the gritty, practical mechanics of daily existence, transforming abstract theory into an unstoppable engine of personal mastery? The answer to that magnificent puzzle awaits us just beyond the veil in Chapter 5. The great clock tower of the ancient observatory stands sentinel over a sprawling valley, its massive bronze hands ticking forward with absolute, majestic indifference to the chaos of human struggle below. In the workshops of the city, scholars and artisans labor through the midnight oil, poring over dusty manuscripts, testing intricate gear assemblies, and sweating over glowing furnaces. They possess magnificent blueprints, brilliant visions, and profound theoretical knowledge of how the universe operates. Yet, many of them remain trapped in cycles of near misses, watching their grand designs crumble into dust precisely at the threshold of manifestation, unable to bridge the chasm between abstract philosophy and tangible reality. Consider the paradox of practical mastery. Knowledge without execution is merely an ornament of the mind. Effort without structural alignment is merely high-speed wandering. People read the sacred truths of existence, feel the temporary warmth of inspiration, and nod in agreement. Yet, when they step back out into the friction of daily life, when bills arrive, deadlines loom, and relationships fracture, they revert instantly to the old, frantic mechanics of striving. They treat manifestation like a lottery ticket rather than an exact science. They hope for the best, panic at the first sign of delay, and wonder why the universe remains silent when they have spent weeks or months wishing for change. Imagine standing inside a master architect's drafting room. The walls are covered with exquisite sketches of soaring bridges, magnificent temples, and thriving communities. But the blueprints remain pinned to the wall. No timber is cut, no stone is quarried, no mortar is mixed. The architect sits at his desk, staring at the drawings, waiting for the buildings to materialize out of thin air through the sheer intensity of his desire. When nothing appears, he shakes his head and declares that the laws of architecture are flawed. This is the great tragedy of the ungrounded seeker. They possess the vision, but they lack the structural pillars of reception. They treat the universe as a vending machine where you press the button of positive thinking and wait for your reward to drop into the slot. But true manifestation is not a game of chance. It is an architectural discipline governed by immutable laws. To bring the unseen into form, one must transition from theoretical dreaming to the mastery of the 5 pillars of reception, recognizing evidence, releasing the how, dropping worthiness tests, occupying the end state, and moving as one who has already received. Without these pillars, the grandest vision collapses under the heavy weight of unconscious resistance. To transition from the passive contemplation of abstract philosophy to the active mastery of manifestation, we must employ the method of recursive thinking, interrogating the exact psychological and metaphysical mechanics that govern the bridge between thought and form. Why do most manifestation attempts fail at the moment of execution? Because the human mind is addicted to control. When a person decides to manifest a new reality, their ego immediately seizes the steering wheel and attempts to micromanage the entire operational pipeline. They try to dictate the timeline, select the exact individuals who must help them, and map out every step of the journey with linear precision. When reality refuses to comply with their rigid timeline, panic sets in. The ego screams that the process is broken, doubts flood the consciousness, and the entire structure collapses. How do the 5 pillars of reception dismantle this egoic control mechanism? Let us deconstruct each pillar through recursive inquiry, beginning with the first, recognizing evidence. Why do we miss the early signs of our manifestation? Because we are looking for physical proof in the material world before we have established the reality in consciousness. The first evidence of a shifting reality is never a bank statement or a physical object. It is a shift in internal posture, a sudden, unshakable calm, a persistent quiet intuition, or an inexplicable surge of creative energy. To recognize evidence is to understand that the internal shift is the precursor to the external form. Let us push deeper into the second and third pillars, releasing the how and dropping worthiness tests. Why is letting go of the how so terrifying to the human intellect? Because the intellect operates entirely from past memory. It can only construct a future out of old bricks. When you demand to know how a desire will manifest, you are locking the infinite intelligence of the universe inside your limited past experience. The universe operates across an infinite grid of multidimensional possibilities. It can orchestrate synchronicities, meetings, and resources through channels your conscious mind cannot even conceive. To release the how is an act of supreme intellectual humility. It is acknowledging that your task is to choose the destination while the cosmos handles the navigation. Simultaneously, dropping worthiness tests requires dismantling the toxic belief that you must suffer to qualify for grace. Why do we constantly interrogate our own qualifications? Because cultural conditioning has taught us that nothing of value is free. We equate ease with laziness and struggle with virtue. When you drop the worthiness test, you realize that a gift does not demand a resume from the recipient. It demands only an open hand. Now, let us examine the fourth and fifth pillars, occupying the end state and moving as one who has received. How does one truly occupy the end state? This is not mere visualization, which is often practiced as a spectator sport where you watch yourself succeed from the outside. Occupying the end state is first-person inhabitation. You must step inside the future reality in your imagination until your nervous system accepts it as present fact. You feel the texture of the desk. You smell the air of the new home. You experience the emotional relief of the resolved conflict now. And finally, moving as one who has received. What is the physical posture of a person whose prayers have already been answered? They do not walk with the frantic, clawing desperation of a beggar. They do not pace the floor worrying about tomorrow. They walk with quiet confidence, calm gratitude, and unshakable reception. They move through their day as a guest of honor at a feast that has already been prepared. When you integrate these 5 pillars into your daily consciousness, striving ceases, resistance dissolves, and manifestation becomes the natural, effortless flow of life expressing itself through your form. In the rolling limestone hills of southern Burgundy during the early 18th century lived an aging master clockmaker named Master Etienne. Etienne was renowned throughout the province for creating mechanical automata, breathtakingly complex figures of gold, brass, and velvet that could write poetry, play the lute, or map the constellations with eerie, lifelike precision. Yet, for over 3 years, Etienne had suffered from a devastating creative block. He had been commissioned by the royal court to build the Chronos of the Sunyan, intricate masterpiece designed to track both solar time and the emotional moods of the seasons. But every time Etienne sat at his workbench, his hands trembled. He would draft a gear assembly, scrap it, redesign it, and tear up the plans in frustration. He spent his days exhausted, working 18-hour shifts, sweating over microscopic cogs, and muttering bitterly about his failing eyesight and declining genius. One evening, as Etienne sat in his dark workshop surrounded by heaps of discarded brass scraps and tangled springs, a traveling master craftsman from Venice named Marco walked unannounced through his open door. Marco was old, blind in one eye, and carried only a small leather satchel. He did not look at the blueprints or inspect the broken gears. Instead, Marco walked over to Etienne's workbench, pulled up a wooden stool, and sat down quietly. "Etienne," Marco said softly, his voice carrying the calm resonance of a cathedral bell. "Why are you at war with your own workshop?" Etienne slammed his tweezers onto the oak table. "You do not understand. The royal court demands perfection. I have tried every mathematical calculation, every metallurgical alloy, every mechanical formula known to man, but the movement jams every single time. My mind is gone. I am not worthy of this commission." Marco smiled gently. "You are trying to manufacture a miracle with the tools of a slave. You are demanding that the universe hand you a masterpiece while your hands are shaking with the terror of lack. You are holding a worthiness trial at your own workbench." Etienne stared at him in stunned silence. "What am I supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for the clock to build itself?" "No," Marco replied, leaning forward. "You must master the 5 pillars of creation. First, look at the brass filings on your table. They are not waste. They are the evidence that you are engaged in transformation. Second, stop dictating how the gear train must be cut. Release your grip on the mechanism and let the natural laws of physics do their work. Third, drop your obsession with whether the king thinks you worthy. The commission was given to you because your hands were chosen for it. Fourth, step into the end state. Do not imagine the clock being built. Imagine the clock already finished, sitting in the royal hall, ticking in perfect, effortless harmony. And fifth, walk tomorrow not as a desperate debtor trying to pay a debt, but as a master who has already delivered the work. Etienne felt a strange, profound tremor run through his chest. The frantic panic that had choked his mind for 3 years suddenly evaporated like morning mist. For the first time in memory, his shoulders dropped. He stopped fighting the metal. He stopped cursing the machinery. That night, Etienne closed his workshop early. He did not touch a tool. Instead, he sat in his wooden chair, closed his eyes, and felt the exquisite, rhythmic ticking of the completed chronos of the sun echoing in his imagination. He breathed with the calm, steady rhythm of a man whose work was already finished in the unseen. When he woke the next morning, something inside him had fundamentally shifted. He walked into his workshop with a calm, unhurried grace. He did not force the metal, he guided it. He selected a gear blank, made a single, clean, unhesitating cut, and watched in awe as the teeth engaged with absolute, effortless perfection. Within 2 weeks, working half the hours he used to work, Etienne completed the chronos of the Sunday. When the royal couriers arrived to inspect the piece, they were left speechless by its flawless precision. When asked by his apprentices how he had achieved such a miraculous breakthrough in so short a time, Etienne simply smiled and tapped his temple. "I stopped fighting the universe. I stopped trying to earn what was already mine. I simply aligned my mind with the finished work, and the metal followed." The story of Master Etienne and the royal clock illustrates the exact operational transition you must make today. Manifestation is not a test of endurance. It is an alignment of consciousness. You can no longer afford to wander through life treating your desires as distant prizes to be hunted down through exhausting, desperate toil. You must anchor the 5 pillars of reception into the very fabric of your daily routine. Let us review the daily pact you make with your own expansion. Recognize the evidence. Acknowledge that your internal shifts, your sudden inspirations, and your persistent longings are the first tangible proof of your expanding reality. Release the how. Drop your mental micromanagement. Trust that the infinite intelligence of the universe has pathways at its disposal that your limited intellect cannot begin to fathom. Drop worthiness tests. Stop interrogating your past. You do not need to earn a gift that has already been addressed to your name. Occupy the end state. Step inside your fulfilled desire in your imagination. Live from it, feel from it, and breathe from it until it feels more real than your current circumstance. Move as one who has received. Walk through your day with the quiet confidence, calm gratitude, and dignified posture of a person whose prayers have already been answered. As you step away from these pages, take a moment to anchor this transformation in your immediate physical reality. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Release the frantic need to figure everything out. Feel the unshakable ground beneath your feet and know that the architecture of your new reality is already complete in the unseen. If this chapter has provided the practical scaffolding you need to transform your inner vision into external mastery, take a brief moment to like and subscribe. Your engagement anchors this frequency and extends this sanctuary of thought to other builders who are currently standing at their own cluttered workbenches, waiting for the courage to drop the tools of struggle. As you step forward from these pages into the hours ahead, a profound and mysterious horizon calls to your spirit. What happens when the path you thought was meant for you suddenly slams shut? And how do we recognize that a closed door is not a rejection, but a divine redirection toward an even greater destiny? The answer to that magnificent puzzle awaits us just beyond the veil in Chapter 6. The great sea roads of the North Atlantic do not yield their secrets to the impatient traveler. In the deep grip of autumn, dense banks of gray fog roll across the black swells, swallowing the horizon and reducing the world to a narrow circle of churning water. A magnificent three-masted schooner lies becalmed in the middle of this vast, watery expanse, its canvas sails hanging limp against the salt-crusted spars. On the quarterdeck, the master navigator stands motionless, gripping the polished brass railing while his crew paces the deck in mounting agitation. They have run out of fresh provisions, the wind has died completely for 14 days, and every calculation they trusted has dissolved into a shifting labyrinth of mist. Consider the profound paradox of human obstruction. When an anticipated doorway slams shut, when a project collapses at the 11th hour, or when a cherished timeline shatters into dust, the human instinct is to declare defeat. People look upon delayed promotions, broken relationships, and blocked pathways as catastrophic evidence of cosmic refusal. They view the closed door as a wall built to keep them out, an insult to their ambition, or a cruel joke played by an indifferent destiny. They hammer against the solid wood with bleeding fists, demanding entry into a room that refuses to open, blind to the invisible currents swirling just beneath the surface of their awareness. Imagine standing on a high mountain pass during a sudden, blinding avalanche. The main trading road ahead is buried under thousands of tons of jagged granite and ice. The merchants who rushed blindly down the path are trapped or destroyed by their refusal to alter course. But a wise old guide, seeing the signs of instability hours earlier, diverted the caravan down a steep, narrow, unmapped gorge. To the merchants, this detour felt like a cruel delay, a frustrating detour that added days to their journey and forced them into uncomfortable terrain. Yet, had they taken the main road, they would have walked straight into the path of total destruction. This is the great hidden alchemy of delay. A closed door is rarely a flat refusal. It is frequently a divine redirection. The universe can only deliver experiences in structural harmony with consciousness. If a seeker is vibrating with the frantic energy of lack, unworthiness, or defensive desperation, the magnificent blessing they crave cannot settle properly in their nervous system. It would shatter them, warp them, or slip through their fingers like dry sand. And so the cosmos in its infinite protective wisdom slams a door shut. It creates a tactical delay, not to punish the seeker, but to recalibrate the vessel, clear out the emotional debris, and prepare the inner landscape for a destiny far greater than the one they were desperately trying to force. To master the alchemy of delay, we must apply the rigorous lens of recursive thinking to the nature of temporal obstruction. Why does the human mind experience waiting as an agonizing form of psychological torture, while the universe experiences it as a precise instrument of preparation? Let us peel back the layers of intellectual anxiety through recursive inquiry. Why do we panic when our linear timelines are disrupted? Because the ego lives entirely in clock time, a manufactured grid of past regrets and future anticipations. The ego measures success by speed and volume. How fast can I get there? How much can I accumulate? How soon can I prove my worth to the world? When the universe intercepts this frantic rush with a red light, a closed door, or an unexpected holding pattern, the ego interprets the pause as a personal insult. It panics, projecting worst-case scenarios and assuming that delay equals permanent denial. How does this psychological panic corrupt our vibrational state? When you panic over a delay, you immediately drop out of the state of reception and re-enter the state of lack. You begin to broadcast desperation, frustration, and doubt. Let us push the recursive inquiry deeper. Why does the universe refuse to deliver our desires while we are vibrating in a state of desperation? Because consciousness is a creative mirror. If you attempt to receive abundance while feeling impoverished, or if you attempt to receive a profound, harmonious relationship while harboring deep-seated fears of abandonment, you will corrupt the manifestation at its root. The universe is not withholding your blessing out of malice. It is withholding it out of absolute structural physics. A delicate, high-frequency experience cannot anchor itself in a vessel that is violently shaking with doubt and impatience. Therefore, the delay is the purification process. Let us press the inquiry to its ultimate root. How does consciousness alchemize a delay into an acceleration? It happens the moment the seeker stops fighting the obstacle and begins examining the internal state. Consider a master silversmith purifying raw ore in a crucible. Does the silversmith pull the metal out of the fire the moment it begins to melt because he is afraid of the heat? No. He leaves it in the blazing furnace precisely because the heat is required to burn away the impurities, the dross, and the foreign elements that would ruin the final crown. When your life is placed in a holding pattern, when doors close, when plans dissolve, when you are forced to sit in the quiet discomfort of waiting, you are in the crucible. The delay is burning away your reliance on frantic effort, your addiction to external validation, and your habit of forcing outcomes through sheer willpower. The universe is not saying no. It is saying, not from that state, not through that frantic energy, and not with that broken instrument. The moment you surrender to the preparation, the moment you recognize that the pause is not a punishment but a sacred recalibration, the resistance dissolves. And once the vessel is purified, the closed doors swing open of their own accord, revealing a pathway you could never have mapped with your own linear logic. In the late autumn of 1792, during the height of the maritime trade wars in the North Sea, a seasoned merchant captain named Silas sat in a damp coastal tavern in Amsterdam, staring bitterly into a mug of stale ale. For 5 consecutive years, Silas had invested every coin, every ounce of energy, and every waking thought into outfitting a magnificent trading vessel named the Star of the East. He had planned to sail for the lucrative spice routes of the East Indies, secure his fortune, and return home a wealthy man. Yet, catastrophe had dogged his every step. First, a sudden royal embargo delayed his departure by 6 months, draining his financial reserves. Then, just as he prepared to weigh anchor, a freak harbor storm crushed his primary rudder against the stone quay, stranding him in port for another winter. Finally, when he secured new funding and repaired the ship, the port authorities impounded his cargo over a disputed customs tariff. Sitting in the tavern that rainy night, Silas felt crushed by an unbearable weight of failure. He slammed his mug onto the wooden table, his voice trembling with exhausted fury as he addressed his first mate. "The universe is against me. Every door I push open is slammed in my face. I have sacrificed my youth, my wealth, and my peace of mind, and what do I have to show for it? Nothing. I am cursed." Across the tavern table sat an old retired cartographer named Master Hendrik, whose maps were legendary throughout the maritime guilds. Hendrik quietly puffed on a clay pipe, watching Silas through a shroud of blue smoke. "Captain Silas," Hendrik said calmly, breaking the silence of the tavern. "You curse the delays, yet you do not realize what they have saved you from." Silas scoffed bitterly. "Saved me from? They have ruined me. What could possibly justify years of heartbreak and blocked paths?" Hendrik reached into his leather satchel and slid an unrolled navigation chart across the sticky wooden table. It was marked with thick red ink detailing recent naval movements in the Indian Ocean. Had your ship sailed on your original timeline 5 years ago, you would have sailed straight into the middle of the Anglo-Dutch naval conflict off the coast of Sumatra. Your vessel would have been seized, your crew imprisoned, and your cargo confiscated at Cannon Point. Had you sailed on your second timeline, you would have run directly into an unmapped seasonal cyclone that swallowed 12 merchant fleets without a trace. Silas stared at the map, his breath catching in his throat. Hendrik leaned forward, his single good eye fixing the captain with a piercing, compassionate gaze. "The universe did not block your path to destroy you, Silas. It blocked your path because you were trying to sail into catastrophe while vibrating with the desperate energy of a beggar. The delays were not punishments. They were the crucible that kept you safe while your consciousness was being prepared to command a much greater voyage." A profound silence descended upon the table. The anger that had consumed Silas for years evaporated like mist before the morning sun. He realized that his obsession with forcing his linear timeline had blinded him to a higher, more intelligent orchestration at work. Silas returned to his ship the next morning, but he did not return with the frantic desperation of a man trying to outrun poverty. He dropped his resistance. He used the final months of delay to quietly upgrade his crew, refine his navigation equipment, and align his mindset with the absolute certainty of a successful voyage. When the Star of the East finally weighed anchor the following spring, the seas parted before her with astonishing grace. The journey was swift, profitable, and prosperous beyond his wildest imagination. When Silas returned to Amsterdam a year later a wealthy man, he carried a profound lesson carved into his soul. A closed door is never a rejection. It is the universe clearing the path to a greater horizon. The Chronicle of Captain Silas and the Delayed Voyage offers an unshakable truth for every seeker navigating the turbulence of modern life. When your plans fracture, when doors slam shut, and when life forces you into an unexpected holding pattern, do not drop into the abyss of panic and self-pity. Recognize the crucible for what it is. The delay is not denial. It is the preparation of your consciousness. The universe is protecting you from the wreckage of your own frantic impatience, carving out the inner capacity required to house the magnificent reality you have been asking for. As you step away from these pages into the hours ahead, execute this immediate mental shift. Whenever you encounter an obstacle, a closed door, or a frustrating delay today, catch your instinct to panic. Do not fight the wall. Do not bang your fists against the timber. Take a slow, deep breath, step back and say quietly to yourself, this is not a denial, this is redirection. The universe is clearing my path, purifying my state, and preparing me for a greater outcome than I could have mapped myself. Feel the immediate profound release of tension that follows the dropping of shoulders, the calming of the pulse, and the quiet, steady return to the frequency of flow. As you step forward from these pages into the unfolding hours, a magnificent and pressing horizon calls to your intellect. How do we navigate the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of financial strain and relentless labor, shifting our source of provision from the sweat of our brow to the absolute sovereignty of our internal state? The answer to that towering question awaits us just beyond the veil in Chapter 7. The banking halls of the great commercial capitals hum with a heavy, restless vibration, a ceaseless symphony of shuffling ledgers, ringing bells, and the hurried footsteps of men and women bound to the wheel of financial survival. Outside the tall, soot-stained windows, a cold winter rain washes over the stone pavements, where ragged street vendors huddle beneath canvas awnings, counting small copper coins with trembling fingers. Inside and out, humanity is caught in the same relentless machinery of exchange, operating under the deeply ingrained belief that money is a rare, precious fluid that must be squeezed from a dry stone through endless labor, sacrifice, and anxiety. Consider the great financial paradox of modern civilization. Never has human productivity been so immense, yet never has humanity felt so impoverished by the pursuit of its own livelihood. People spend their days chained to desks, assembly lines, and digital screens, trading their precious life energy for units of currency, operating under the constant, low-grade hum of terror that tomorrow the well might run dry. They look upon wealth as an external master, a capricious sovereign that bestows its favors only on the ruthless, the hyper-industrious, or the extraordinarily lucky. They believe that if they stop running for even a single moment, the floorboards of their security will collapse into the abyss of debt and destitution. Imagine standing in a vast, subterranean cavern where thousands of people are bent over stone basins, frantically bailing water out of shallow puddles using cracked wooden bowls. They sweat, they strain, they curse the leaking ceiling, and they compete fiercely for every drop, believing that the supply of water is strictly limited to what drips down through the crevices of the rock. Yet just 10 feet away, behind a thin, sheer velvet curtain, lies an underground subterranean sea, infinite, pure, and perpetually overflowing, connected by a grand stone archway that has stood wide open since the date of time. Not one of them looks behind the curtain because their eyes are glued to the mud at the bottom of their small, cracking bowls. This is the great tragic comedy of human economics. It is an economy built entirely on the illusion of lack. People approach money, opportunity, and material provision from the state of the pauper, begging the universe for a raise, a client, a contract, or a windfall, while broadcasting a vibrational frequency of intense desperation. They work themselves into chronic exhaustion, believing that sweat is the sole currency that purchases grace. But what if the entire premise of economic struggle is a monumental error? What if prosperity is not something you chase down through exhausting toil, but an internal atmosphere you inhabit? To shatter the psychological chains of financial anxiety, we must apply the rigorous lens of recursive thinking to the nature of wealth and value. Why does humanity view money as a scarce commodity rather than an energetic reflection of consciousness? Let us peel back the layers of economic conditioning through recursive inquiry. Why do we believe that financial survival requires constant strain and self-denial? Because historical feudalism and early industrialism forged a direct neural link in the human brain between physical exertion and survival. For centuries, you labored in the fields from sunrise to sunset, and your physical caloric intake depended entirely on the sweat of your brow. We inherited this mechanical survival code and transposed it onto a monetary system that is fundamentally symbolic. We treat paper and digital currency as if they were physical resources carved out of finite mountains, forgetting that money is merely a medium of exchange, a crystallized form of human trust, imagination, and value. How does working from the state of lack perpetuate financial struggle? Let us push the inquiry deeper. What happens to your cognitive capacity, your creative intuition, and your magnetic pull when you approach work from panic? When you work from the state of lack, when every action is driven by the terror of not having enough, you contract your energy field. You view every other human being as a competitor for a shrinking pie. You become defensive, risk-averse, and hyper-focused on scarcity. And because consciousness is a mirror, the economic universe reflects that exact contraction right back at you. Clients pull away, opportunities dry up, and financial pressure intensifies, confirming your deepest, darkest fears. Let us press the inquiry to its absolute root. What is the true mechanics of economic abundance? Abundance is an internal condition, not an external accumulation. The universe does not respond to your financial anxiety, your ledger sheets, or your overtime hours. It responds to your assumption of prosperity. Think of a master craftsman or an innovative visionary who creates profound value for the world. Do they generate wealth by grinding away in a state of terrified desperation? No. When true wealth flows, it flows from a state of inspiration, overflow, and intrinsic value creation. Consider the difference between working from lack and working from abundance. When you work from lack, your labor is an act of trying to plug a sinking ship with your bare hands. You are attempting to extract value from a reluctant world. When you work from abundance, your labor is an act of expression. You are sharing an overflow of value that already exists within your consciousness. The universe is an infinite, self-replenishing treasury. When you shift your identity from a struggling laborer trying to earn a living to a prosperous steward allowing abundance to flow through you, the entire operational paradigm changes. You do not stop working indeed, you often work with greater joy and focus, but the frantic, clawing desperation is gone, and once the desperation dissolves, the economic mirror shifts its reflection, drawing wealth to you through channels you never could have forced by sheer willpower alone. In the bustling merchant district of 17th century London, amidst the narrow, cobbled alleys near the Thames, lived a master ironmonger named Thomas. For over a decade, Thomas had been trapped in a relentless cycle of financial pressure. He owned a small workshop that produced iron hinges, latches, and architectural hardware, but despite working 16-hour days, hammering until his joints ached and his vision blurred, he was drowning in debt. Thomas was exhausted, worn down, and perpetually bitter. He watched larger merchant houses secure lucrative royal contracts, while his own workshop hovered constantly on the brink of bankruptcy. Every evening he sat at his meager wooden desk, holding his head in his hands, staring at his unpaid ledgers and whispering into the empty room, "Why am I failing? I work harder than any man in this district. Why does the world withhold its wealth from me? I have sacrificed my health, my family, and my peace, yet I am still a pauper." One afternoon, an old merchant trader from the Levant named Master Tariq walked into Thomas's dusty shop. Tariq examined the iron latches on the workbench, running his fingers over the exquisite, flawless detail of Thomas's craftsmanship. "Your ironwork is of royal quality, Master Thomas," Tariq observed quietly, "yet your ledger smells of panic." Thomas slammed his heavy blacksmith's hammer onto the wooden block. "Quality means nothing when the purse is empty. I sweat blood for every farthing. The market is cruel, the taxes are crushing, and wealth belongs only to the fortunate. I must work harder, sleep less, and squeeze every penny from my customers if I am to survive. Tariq shook his head slowly, stepping closer to the exhausted ironmonger. You are not failing because the market is cruel, Thomas. You are failing because you are hammering your iron from the state of a slave. You approach your craft as a beggar trying to extract scraps from a miserly world. You work from lack, and so lack is the only harvest your labor can produce. Thomas stared at him, bewildered and defensive. What else is there? Money does not appear by magic. I must grind for it. No, Tariq replied calmly. You must change your treasury. Tomorrow morning, before you light your forge, do not come into this shop with panic in your chest. Sit in your quiet room and acknowledge that the universe is an infinite treasury of abundance. Assume that your prosperity is already established. Then, when you step up to your anvil, work not as a desperate man trying to pay a debt, but as a master artisan, expressing an overflow of wealth that is already yours. That evening, something shifted deep within Thomas's spirit. The bitter exhaustion that had defined his life for a decade began to dissolve. He took Tariq's advice seriously. The next morning, before lighting his coals, he sat quietly in his cottage, breathing in the calm, unshakable certainty that his financial life was secure, abundant, and divinely supported. He stopped viewing his customers as targets to be squeezed and began viewing his workshop as a center of creative value. He went to work not with the frantic desperation of a debtor, but with the quiet, joyful dignity of a master. Within 2 weeks, an unexpected royal quartermaster walked into his shop, having heard rumors of Thomas's peerless craftsmanship from a distant guild, and placed a massive, advance-paid order for the iron hardware of a new naval fleet. Within a month, a wealthy shipping merchant offered to finance an expansion of his workshop, doubling his production capacity. Within 3 months, Thomas was employing apprentices, clearing his debts, and operating with a financial ease he had never thought possible. When Master Tariq returned to the shop a year later, Thomas greeted him with a deep, radiant smile. I changed nothing about my city, my hands, or my raw materials, Thomas said warmly. I only changed my state of consciousness. I stopped fighting the market and started accepting the abundance that was already mine. The Chronicle of Master Thomas and the London Ironmongery establishes the foundational truth of financial liberation. Abundance is an internal state, not an external accumulation. You can no longer afford to approach your livelihood from the panic of lack. Working harder from a state of desperation only accelerates exhaustion. It does not generate true wealth. When you tie your survival to the frantic clawing effort of the ego, you lock yourself out of the infinite treasury of the cosmos. As you step away from these pages into the hours ahead, execute this immediate financial realignment. Whenever the familiar knot of anxiety tightens in your chest regarding money, bills, or provision today, catch yourself instantly. Do not spiral into worst-case scenarios. Step back, breathe deeply, and declare your sovereignty. The universe is an infinite treasury of abundance. I am not trying to extract wealth from a reluctant world. I am allowing prosperity to flow through my work. I work from abundance, not from lack. Feel the immediate financial and emotional relief that follows the dropping of tension in the shoulders, the calming of the breath, and the quiet, steady return to the frequency of flow. Close your eyes for a brief heartbeat. Release the heavy, grinding anxiety of financial survival. Feel the quiet, unshakable security of a universe that supplies the stars in their courses and stands ready to support every expression of your creative value. If this chapter on the economics of abundance has unlocked a new horizon of financial peace within your spirit, take a brief moment to like and subscribe. Your engagement anchors this frequency and extends this sanctuary of thought to other builders who are currently laboring in the dark, waiting for the courage to drop the tools of lack. As you step forward from these pages into the unfolding hours, a majestic and sacred threshold calls to your soul. How do we finally put an end to the self-inflicted torture of shaming our own longings, transforming our deepest desires from embarrassing secrets into a holy declaration of purpose? The answer to that towering question awaits us just beyond the veil in Chapter 8. The deep, vaulted chambers of the human conscience often resemble a neglected cathedral at midnight, where cold stone floors echo with the silent footsteps of self-judgment. In the hidden alcoves of the mind, millions of people maintain a secret, locked vault. Inside this vault lie their most exquisite ambitions, their grandest visions, and their deepest, most passionate desires. Yet, rather than celebrating these longings as sacred artifacts, the owners of the cathedral drape them in shrouds of dust and guilt. They look upon their own desires with a mixture of suspicion and shame, whispering to themselves that to want greatness, beauty, abundance, or transcendent love is a moral failing, an embarrassing stain of the ego that must be scrubbed away with humility, asceticism, and quiet self-deprecation. Consider the profound psychological paradox of human aspiration. Society trains its members to dream in whispers and apologize for their hungers. A person is encouraged to have ambitions, but only within safe, predictable boundaries dictated by the collective consensus. The moment an individual dares to harbor a vision that transcends the ordinary, a longing so vast, so specific, and so luminous that it stuns even their own imagination, the internal tribunal convenes. They begin to cross-examine their own heart. Who am I to want this? What right do I have to expect such magnificence? Is my wanting not a form of pride, greed, or supreme arrogance? They shame their own longing, treating the burning fire in their chest like a hidden disease that must be quarantined from the polite society of their peers. Imagine standing in a magnificent royal conservatory filled with rare, exotic orchids that have been brought from the wildest jungles of the earth. The blossoms flare in brilliant shades of violet, gold, and crimson, radiating a rich, intoxicating perfume into the warm air. Yet the gardener assigned to tend the greenhouse walks down the aisles with a pair of heavy shears, snapping off the largest, most vibrant buds before they can fully open. When asked why he destroys the crowning glory of his own garden, the gardener replies with a solemn, sorrowful expression, "They are too proud. They reach too high toward the glass ceiling. If I let them bloom in their full majesty, the other plants will feel inadequate." True virtue lies in smallness, in clipped stems, and in quiet, unnoticed survival. This is the great, self-inflicted tragedy of human psychology. It is the institutionalized shaming of the longing. People treat their deepest desires as acts of rebellion against a modest cosmos. They apologize for their ambitions, dilute their prayers, and shrink their visions to fit the cramped expectations of a fearful world. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the holy hunger burning in your heart is not a sin to be confessed, but the Creator breathing through your individuality? What if shaming your desire is not an act of humility, but a profound insult to the intelligence that planted it there? To eradicate the deep-seated habit of shaming our own longings, we must apply the rigorous lens of recursive thinking to the metaphysics of desire and identity. Why has humanity been culturally conditioned to view ambition as a moral hazard rather than a divine mandate? Let us peel back the layers of historical guilt through recursive inquiry. Why do religious and cultural institutions historically promote the suppression of personal desire? Because mass governance throughout the ages found it far easier to control a population that viewed its own longings as inherently sinful. If you can convince a human being that their natural hunger for expansion, joy, and mastery is a symptom of spiritual corruption, you hold absolute leverage over their mind. You become the mandatory mediator between them and the divine. You sell them penance, salvation, and smallness as virtues, ensuring they remain docile, manageable, and perpetually dependent on external authority for validation. How does this institutionalized guilt manifest in the individual psyche today? It manifests as the internal split, the civil war between what the soul is desperately calling you to be and what the ego believes is socially safe and morally acceptable. Let us push the inquiry deeper. What happens when you suppress a genuine desire? Does the desire vanish into thin air? Absolutely not. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. When you suppress a holy longing out of false modesty or misplaced guilt, the desire does not die, it metastasizes. It turns inward, mutating into chronic anxiety, somatic illness, depression, or a bitter, corrosive cynicism that watches others succeed while quietly seething in the dark. Let us press the inquiry to its absolute root. What is the metaphysical origin of a desire? A desire is not a manufactured product of the ego's vanity. The ego does not create true vision. The ego only creates fears, defenses, and reactions. The deep, persistent longing for expansion, for a magnificent partnership, a healing breakthrough, a creative masterwork, or financial sovereignty originates from the non-physical depths of divine intelligence. It is the universe utilizing your unique focal point of consciousness to experience a new facet of creation. Consider this immutable law. The universe does not mock its own creation. If a desire is planted in your awareness, it is because the infinite machinery of reality is already prepared to express it through your form. To shame your longing, to stand before the altar of your own soul and declare that your dreams are too big, too greedy, or too unearned is not holiness. It is blasphemy against your own divine architecture. It is the wave standing in the middle of the ocean, screaming at the tide for daring to be too grand. When you finally stop shaming your longing, a profound psychological and spiritual alchemy occurs. The inner civil war ends. You no longer need to apologize for your ambitions or invent false justifications for your dreams. You recognize that wanting is simply the universe breathing through your lungs, and that to fully accept your desire is the highest form of gratitude you can offer to life. In the northern reaches of 16th century Flanders, in a bustling town renowned for its stained glass artisans, lived a master craftsman named Master Willem. Willem's workshop produced some of the finest colored glass in Europe, windows that adorned municipal town halls and provincial chapels with dignified traditional scenes of saints, kings, and biblical histories. Yet, for decades, Willem had carried a secret, burning vision in his soul, a design for a monumental cathedral rose window that did not depict traditional saints or conventional religious iconography. It was a breathtaking cosmic explosion of light, geometry, and color, a swirling, radiant mandala of gold, azure, and crimson that represented the infinite expansion of the human spirit. It was an ambitious, magnificent concept that far exceeded anything the conservative guildmasters of Flanders had ever attempted. Whenever Willem thought of crafting this masterpiece, a heavy wave of shame would wash over him. He would close his sketchbook and lock it away in the bottom of his cedar chest, whispering to himself, "Who am I to dream of such grandeur? I am a simple artisan from a provincial guild. To attempt such a magnificent work is the height of pride. The elders will call me arrogant. God will humble me for my vanity." For 20 years, Willem lived in this quiet, self-imposed torture. He continued to cut ordinary glass for ordinary windows, while his soul withered under the weight of his unexpressed genius. Whenever he walked past the great parish church, a deep, aching sorrow gripped his chest, knowing he was hiding the greatest gift he had ever been given. One spring evening, an aging master glassblower from Venice, traveling through Flanders on his final pilgrimage, sought lodging at Willem's workshop. As they sat by the hearth sharing bread and wine, the old Venetian noticed a single discarded sketch of the cosmic rose window that Willem had carelessly left protruding from a workbench drawer. The Venetian pulled the sketch out, held it up to the candlelight, and sat in absolute breathless silence for several minutes. His eyes filled with tears of wonder. "Master Willem," the old man whispered reverently, "this is not the work of an ambitious ego. This is a vision of the heavens translated into glass. By all the saints in heaven, why is this hidden in a drawer instead of radiating from the heart of a cathedral?" Willem looked down at his hands, his face burning with a mixture of fear and shame. "It is too grand," he stammered. "It is arrogant. I am not worthy of creating something so magnificent. I feared the judgment of the guild. I feared my own pride." The Venetian set the sketch down gently, leaning across the table with a fierce, compassionate intensity. "Listen to me, Willem. The pride does not lie in creating the magnificent work. The pride lies in refusing to offer the gift that was entrusted to your care out of a false, cowardly show of humility. You think you are being humble by hiding your longing. In truth, you are insulting the Creator by burying the talent you were given. The universe did not place this vision in your soul to mock your smallness. It gave it to you because your hands are the only ones in this epoch configured to bring it into the light." The words struck Willem with the force of a thunderbolt. The armor of shame that he had worn for 20 years shattered instantly. He realized that his self-rejection was not virtue. It was fear, dressed up as piety. The next morning, Willem did not go to the workshop with hesitation or guilt. He walked with the calm, unshakable sovereignty of a man answering a sacred commission. He ordered the finest Rhenish glass, stoked his furnaces to their highest heat, and began cutting the glass without apology, without doubt, and without asking permission from the guild. When the great cosmic rose window was finally installed in the cathedral choir 10 months later, the morning sun struck the glass with such transcendent brilliance that the entire stone nave was flooded with living ribbons of gold and azure. People traveled from across Europe just to stand in its light, reduced to tears by its beauty. When the local magistrates offered Willem formal praise for his peerless contribution, he did not cower in false modesty. He accepted the honor with quiet, dignified gratitude, knowing that he had finally stopped shaming the longing that the universe had placed in his care. The Chronicle of Master Willem and the Cathedral Glass illuminates the final psychological barrier that every seeker must conquer, the unconditional cessation of self-judgment. You can no longer afford to apologize for your greatness. You can no longer dress up your fear of visibility as humility, nor can you treat your deepest, most magnificent longings as embarrassing secrets that need to be hidden from the world. The universe does not blush at your ambition. It applauds it. As you step away from these pages into the hours ahead, execute this immediate mental liberation. Whenever the familiar voice of shame whispers, "Who are you to want this? Isn't this too grand for you?" Catch the thought instantly. Do not negotiate with it. Do not shrink to make others comfortable. Stand tall in your consciousness and declare your sovereign truth. My desire is not my arrogance, it is my commissioning. The universe placed this longing in my heart because it belongs in my reality. I drop all shame. I accept my expansion without apology. Feel the profound, electrifying surge of energy that follows the lifting of emotional weight, the expansion of the chest, and the absolute radiant alignment with your true purpose. Close your eyes for a brief heartbeat. Release the heavy, suffocating garments of false humility and self-shame. Feel the magnificent, unhindered brilliance of your own soul, and know that you are fully authorized to claim every grand vision that has ever burned in your chest. As you step forward from these pages into the unfolding hours, a majestic and triumphant horizon calls to your entire being. How do we carry this unshakable inner certainty into the physical world, moving through our days not with the frantic desperation of a beggar, but with the quiet, majestic stride of an answered prayer? The answer to that towering question awaits us just beyond the veil. In Chapter 9, the morning light creeps over the high parapets of the old city, finding the stone streets still slick with the memory of the night's rain. Among the early stirrings of the populace, the hurried laborers, the anxious merchants, the hollow-eyed beggars, there moves a figure of startling quietude. This person does not hurry, yet they arrive. They do not scan the horizon for luck, yet they seem to walk in the center of a magnetic vortex. Their gait is not the frantic, disjointed movement of one chasing a disappearing future. It is the measured, rhythmic pace of one who is returning home. Consider the profound paradox of human movement. The vast majority of humanity lives in a state of perpetual frantic departure. They walk through their days in the posture of the not yet. Their shoulders are hunched toward the ears, their eyes are darting nervously for an exit or an opportunity, and their speech is laced with the frantic vibrations of one who fears the ground will be pulled from beneath them. They are forever in the act of begging life to give them something they do not currently possess. They move as if they are pleading with a deaf deity to notice their worthiness. They treat each day as an audition, a desperate performance intended to convince the universe that they have finally done enough, suffered enough, or performed enough to earn the prize. Imagine a man standing on the deck of a ship that has already reached its destination. He has walked across the gangplank. His luggage is already sitting in the hotel room on the shore. He has already checked in. Yet, out of deep-seated unconscious habit, he continues to pace the deck of the ship. He shouts orders to the phantom crew, he scrubs the deck until his hands bleed, and he screams at the horizon, begging for the journey to end and for the shore to be granted to him. He is blind to the fact that he is already on the pier. He is blind to the fact that his anxiety is the only thing preventing him from stepping off the vessel and walking toward his life. This is the great, unrecognized truth of human manifestation. Most seekers never arrive because they never stop acting as if they are in transit. They continue to walk in the posture of the beggar even after they have been granted the keys to the kingdom. To walk as the answered is the ultimate mastery of the human experience. It is the transition from the frantic kinetics of the seeker to the calm, resonant stillness of the finder. It is the secret of the masters, the quiet confidence of those who know that what is theirs is already established in the architecture of the unseen, and that the physical world is merely a mirror waiting for the final, graceful alignment to catch up. To master the art of moving as one who has received, we must apply the rigorous lens of recursive thinking to the relationship between physical posture, mental state, and external reality. Why is it that the human body, the most sensitive receiver of internal belief, often betrays the very reality we claim to be manifesting? Let us peel back the layers of behavioral conditioning through recursive inquiry. Why does the ego cling to the posture of the seeker? Because the ego derives its entire sense of importance from the process of searching. If you are not searching, if you are not working on yourself, if you are not striving for growth, the ego fears it will vanish into the abyss of insignificance. The identity of the seeker provides a comfortable, endless narrative. It allows the individual to avoid the terrifying responsibility of actually having what they want. To have is to be visible. To have is to be accountable. To have is to relinquish the protective shield of I am still learning. How does this seeker posture sabotage the manifestation of our reality? Let us push the inquiry deeper. What is the physiological and energetic frequency of the seeker? The seeker radiates a frequency of gap. It screams to the universe, I do not have it, therefore I am not it. Because the law of the universe is not based on your words, but on your state of being, you will never receive what you are searching for, because to receive it, you would have to stop being the one who searches. You are effectively locking yourself in a feedback loop of eternal pursuit. Let us press the inquiry to its absolute root. How does one move as the answered? To move as the answered is to inhabit the end state as a physical fact. This is not a mental exercise to be performed for 10 minutes in the morning. It is a fundamental shift in your baseline nervous system. You must cultivate the calm of the answer. When a person has an unshakable inner certainty that their desire is fulfilled, when the contract is signed in the chambers of the soul, the need for frantic motion vanishes. They do not speak in the future tense. They speak from the stability of the present. They do not react to the turbulence of the world with terror, because they know that the turbulence is merely the shedding of an old layer to reveal the new reality. Think of a monarch who has just been crowned. Does the monarch sprint through the palace corridors, frantically asking the servants if they are truly the ruler? Do they check the mirror every 5 minutes to ensure the crown is still on their head? No. They walk with an inherent, unforced grace. Their authority is not something they are trying to acquire. It is an atmosphere they inhabit. When you walk as the answered, your gait, your tone, your responses, and your decisions become expressions of that inherent authority. You are no longer trying to persuade life to give you anything. You are simply stepping into the room that was always yours, and the physical world, the mirror, has no choice but to adjust its reflection to match the sovereign majesty of your stance. In the year 1804, during the intense, shifting political landscapes of the Napoleonic era, a young, untitled diplomat named Julian was tasked with negotiating a near impossible peace treaty between two warring European powers. The odds of success were deemed to be less than 1 in 1,000. The tension in the diplomatic halls was suffocating. Every day, Julian was surrounded by high-ranking ministers who moved with the nervous, shifting eyes of men who were terrified of losing their positions, their reputations, and their lives. They barked orders, they leaked confidential reports to the press, and they paced the corridors in states of visible, trembling exhaustion. Julian, however, moved with a strange, disconcerting calm. He did not lobby. He did not engage in the frantic backroom bargaining that defined his peers. Each morning he would dress in his finest attire, sit at his desk, and spend an hour in absolute silence, feeling the reality of the peace treaty already signed, already ratified, and already transforming the lives of the millions it would save. He held the emotional tone of the victory in his body, carrying himself as if the war were already a historical footnote. One evening, the lead representative of the opposing power, a man known for his icy, predatory intellect, pulled Julian aside in the library. The representative was visibly agitated, his hands shaking as he reached for a glass of wine. "Julian," the representative hissed, "do you not see the gravity of our situation? My army is mobilizing. The press is calling for your head. Your own government is already preparing your scapegoating if this fails. How can you be so unnervingly calm? Do you have secret intelligence?" Are you hiding something? Julian smiled, a genuine, warm, and utterly fearless expression. He took a sip of his wine and looked his opponent in the eye. I am not hiding anything, Excellency. I have simply already finished the work. I have seen the outcome. The peace is already established in the mind. The signing in this hall is merely the final formal notification that the world must catch up to what has already been decided. The opponent stared at him, baffled, unsettled, and ultimately intimidated. He could not grapple with a man who had already exited the battle. Julian's absolute certainty of the outcome functioned like a gravitational field. It drew the other man into the same state of surrender. 2 days later, the representative, stripped of his aggressive armor by Julian's calm, actually walked into Julian's office and signed the treaty on terms far more favorable than Julian had even imagined. When Julian was asked by his incredulous superiors how he had managed to secure such an unlikely peace, he did not speak of strategies or tactics. He said, I stopped fighting the war. I spent my time inhabiting the peace. When you walk as the answered, the battle is over before it ever reaches the field. The victory of Julian in the halls of power provides the final, essential mechanism for your own manifestation. You have been fighting a war of pursuit for far too long, convinced that your worth is tied to the struggle. It is time to sign the treaty with yourself. Moving as the answered is the highest form of discipline. It requires you to maintain the inner reality of your desire even when the physical world has not yet reflected it. It requires you to walk with the quiet, majestic dignity of one who has already been granted the prize. As you move through the remainder of this day, execute this final shift in your physical and mental theater. Stop acting like a petitioner. Stop narrating your struggle to your friends. Stop performing your anxiety as proof that you are working hard. Move through the world as if the outcome is already a historical fact. When you speak, speak from the stability of the end. When you face an obstacle, address it not with the panic of a victim, but with the calm authority of a victor who knows that this hurdle is merely the final fleeting adjustment of the mirror. As you step forward from these pages, an final, ultimate challenge awaits us. We have cleared the internal barriers, we have aligned our state, and we have mastered the posture of reception. Now, how do we leave the past behind entirely and step into the sovereign act of claiming the life we were always meant to live? The answer to that crowning realization awaits us in the final chapter, chapter 10. The great sun begins its final descent, painting the horizon in strokes of molten gold, bruised violet, and an aching iridescent amber. Below the precipice where the earth meets the endless sea, the tide pulls back, revealing the smooth, wet sand of tabula rasa, waiting for the imprint of a purposeful step. A lone figure stands at the edge of this threshold, breathing in the salt-heavy air, watching the boundary between what has been and what is yet to come dissolve in the fading light. Behind them lie the crumbling fortresses of old identities, the discarded armor of past struggles, and the narrow, dusty paths of becoming. Before them lies the vast, uncharted expanse of the sovereign life, the realm of absolute claim. Consider the final, ultimate paradox of the human journey. The traveler spends a lifetime searching for the key to the iron gate, only to reach the end of the road and realize they have been standing in the doorway the entire time. Most people live their lives in the provisional tense. They act as if they are merely preparing to live, treating each day as a rehearsal for a performance that never begins. They collect wisdom, they seek guidance, they refine their beliefs, but they stop short of the final decisive act of total ownership. They are like guests who have been invited to a royal banquet, but spend the entire evening huddled in the foyer, obsessing over the cleanliness of their shoes and the propriety of their invitation. They never quite bring themselves to walk into the banquet hall, pull up a chair, and begin to eat. Imagine a sovereign king who has lost his memory. He wanders the countryside, dressed in the tattered rags of a commoner, begging for crusts of bread and sleeping in the straw of stable barns. He has forgotten the palace, he has forgotten his name, and he has forgotten his right to rule. He spends years listening to the villagers whisper about a legendary ruler who will one day return to claim the throne. He joins their search, he cries for the king's return, and he suffers in the cold, convinced that he is a subject waiting for a savior. One night he accidentally wanders into the ruins of the throne room and catches his reflection in a shard of a polished mirror. In that instant, the memory crashes back the weight of the crown, the architecture of the halls, the absolute authority of his own bloodline. The rags do not change, but the man vanishes. In his place stands the king. This is the great final shift. It is the moment the seeker dissolves and the sovereign emerges. The journey from wanting to having is not a physical distance to be traveled. It is a psychological transition to be declared. It is the act of dropping the role of the subject and stepping into the identity of the ruler. To grasp the mechanics of the sovereign claim, we must employ the most rigorous form of recursive thinking, interrogating the root of identity itself. Why do we cling to the identity of the seeker even when we intellectually grasp that we are the creators of our own experience? Why does the human soul resist the total assumption of its own power? Because total power requires total responsibility. As long as you are a seeker, you can blame the timing, the economy, the universe, or your own lack of spiritual preparation for your failures. As long as you are a student, you can hide behind your books and your teachers. But to make the sovereign claim to declare that your reality is a direct reflection of your own consciousness is to strip away every excuse. It is the end of the victim narrative. It is the final, terrifying, and exhilarating realization that you are the sole author, the sole actor, and the sole audience of your existence. How does the sovereign claim reorganize the structure of reality? Let us apply the recursive method. If reality is a mirror, what happens when the mirror stops reflecting a striving self and begins reflecting a sovereign self? The moment you make the claim, the energetic signal you broadcast to the universe shifts from a query, "Can I have this?" to a command, "This is my nature." A command is not a request, it is an orientation of reality. When you command, you are not trying to push the world around. You are aligning your inner state with the fundamental truth of your being. You stop negotiating with conditions and start defining them. How do we embody this claim in the face of contradictory physical evidence? This is the ultimate test of the master. When your bank account shows debt, when your relationship shows distance, or when your body shows illness, the sovereign claim remains unmoved. Why? Because the sovereign understands that the present physical form is merely the echo of a past state of consciousness. It is the lingering smoke of a fire that has already been extinguished. To be sovereign is to refuse to be dictated to by the echo. You acknowledge the echo, you honor its existence as a record of where you were, but you focus your creative energy on the now, the seed of the new state. When you fully occupy the sovereign claim, you cease to be a hostage to cause and effect. You become the cause. You understand that your consciousness is the primary reality, and the physical world is merely the secondary, malleable plastic that molds itself around your decree. You do not ask the universe for permission. You do not wait for the stars to align. You align the stars by the absolute unwavering gravity of your own presence. You are no longer a guest in this life. You are the architect. In the annals of the ancient city-state of Ethelgard, there lived a legendary strategist named General Marcus. During a brutal decade-long siege, Ethelgard had been reduced to a starving, desperate city. The walls were crumbling, the granaries were empty, and the ruling council spent their days in terrified debates, paralyzed by the fear that their total annihilation was inevitable. They brought maps to Marcus every day, begging him to find a way to outmaneuver the enemy armies that surrounded them on every side. Marcus, however, rarely looked at the maps. He spent his time in the inner sanctum of the city's high tower, sitting in a chair of carved stone, looking out over the battlefield with a calm, penetrating gaze. The council grew furious. "The city is falling," they screamed. "Why are you sitting here when the enemy is at the gates? We need a strategy. We need to move." Marcus looked at them and spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who had already seen the end of the war. "The battle was won the moment I refused to accept the possibility of defeat. Move the granaries to the eastern quarter, burn the northern bridge, and prepare the city for a victory feast. We do not need a strategy to survive. We need an assumption of our sovereignty." The council believed him to be mad. They assumed he had finally succumbed to the starvation. But desperate for any alternative to their inevitable death, they obeyed his commands. That night, under the cover of a dense, unseasonable fog that descended upon the valley, a phenomenon so strange it was later attributed to the sudden, collective shift in the city's resolve, the enemy army was thrown into a state of inexplicable internal panic. Their supply lines collapsed, their commanders turned on one another, and their forces disintegrated into total chaos. By dawn, the siege had been lifted. The enemy retreated, leaving their weapons and supplies behind, terrified by the ghosts they claimed to have seen walking the walls of the city. When the council came to Marcus to celebrate their miraculous survival, they asked him, "What was your secret? What brilliant maneuver broke the siege?" Marcus laughed, a sound that seemed to echo with the wisdom of the centuries. "There was no maneuver. There was only the claim. I did not win the war because I fought better. I won the war because I inhabited the state of the victor. I assumed the city was already safe, and the universe rearranged the circumstances to confirm my decree. The siege existed only as long as you believed you were under it. The moment I claimed our sovereignty, the walls were never breached. He had not played the game of the victim. He had simply occupied the throne of the sovereign, and reality, having no other choice, had bowed to his command. The victory of General Marcus provides the ultimate culminating truth of our journey. You have spent your entire life playing the role of the subject, reacting to the world, bargaining with the circumstances, and negotiating with your own limitations. It is time to ascend to the throne. The sovereign claim is not an arrogant demand. It is the recognition of your fundamental nature. You are the consciousness that perceives the world, and therefore, you are the consciousness that dictates the terms of the world's existence. As you step away from this manuscript, carry this sovereign truth into the marrow of your bones. Do not go back to the role of the seeker. Do not go back to the posture of the beggar. You are the architect of your own reality, and the physical world is merely the clay waiting for your imprint. Claim your peace, not because the world is quiet, but because you are the center of the storm. Claim your abundance, not because the money is in your pocket, but because you are the source from which all value flows. Claim your love, not because someone has arrived, but because you are the very embodiment of the grace you seek. Close your eyes and breathe in the absolute sovereign truth of your being. Feel the crown upon your head, the weight of the authority in your veins, and the unshakable knowing that the universe is not your master but your mirror. You are the architect. You are the cause. You are the claim. The cycle is complete. The threshold has been crossed. The seeker has vanished, and in their place stands the sovereign, ready to write the next chapter of the divine unfolding. The story does not end here. It merely begins anew, in the infinite, radiant present moment of your own creation. Go forth, command your world, and let the light of your sovereign claim rewrite the stars.